Previously on the keys of time.
We now have the keys that are necessary to start to systematically unveil the Bible's chronology. The first two keys revealed the divinely ordained blueprint or framework for time. Keys 1 and 2 basically say that the blueprint is a week of 7 days of 1,000 years each. The next two keys resulted in the discovery of God's redemption chronology, which exists alongside the Bible's actual chronology. Key 3 says, at the end of every Jubilee cycle of 49 actual years, God adds a special 50th year of grace. Key 4 is the principle of unreckoned time, which says that God does not count times when his people's sin causes his plan of redemption to be suspended. This is convincingly revealed by the 479 completed years recorded in 1 Kings 6:1, which are 131 years short of the actual time. Now, the total times of servitude are also 131 years. So if they are subtracted from the total time, this gives exactly 479 years. We will now look at the next 490-year Great Jubilee cycle in the chronology of redemption, from the dedication of Solomon's temple to the decree of Artaxerxes to restore and rebuild Jerusalem. After Solomon's death, Solomon's son Rehoboam decided to impose higher taxes. This prompted a revolt by the 10 northern tribes, leaving just the 2 southern tribes of Benjamin and Judah loyal to Rehoboam. The result was a divided kingdom, Israel in the north and Judah in the south. For both kingdoms we're told how long each of their kings reigned and when they started their reign. The start of a reign is given in terms of the reign of the king in the other kingdom. This is called a synchronism. Moreover, Judah and Israel had different ways of measuring time. For example, there's the issue of whether they used accession years or not. And then there's the issue of whether they used Nisan or Tishri-based years. And then there's the issue of whether there were co-regencies and interregnums. The second reason for the difficulty of this period is in the connection of Israel's chronology with that of the surrounding nations which interacted with her, especially Egypt and Assyria and Babylon. The primary chronology we need to follow is that of Judah. The two kingdoms used different methods to measure the reigns of their kings. The first issue is when a king began counting the official years of his reign. The reigns of kings are given in whole numbers of years. There are two possibilities. The first method was the accession year system. The previous year in which he came to the throne was called his accession year. Only when the next year began did he enter his first official regnal year. So, the year in which the previous king died was counted to him as a complete year, even though he only ruled for part of it. Now, the second method was the non-accession year system. Here, there is no accession year, but the king counts the year in which he began to reign as his first year, even though he only reigned for part of it. As before, he also counts his final year as a complete year. On the non-accession year system, any transitional years are counted twice. The second issue is which month was used for the start of the official year for a king's reign. Nisan, which is the first month of the calendar year, or Tishri, which is the 7th month of the calendar year. It was 745 BC. God promised Ahaz that both Syria and Israel would soon fall. And Isaiah urged Ahaz to trust God, otherwise he would not be established, but come under more troubles. Also in Isaiah 7:8-9, he promised that within 65 years Israel would be no longer in the land.
For the head of Aram is Damascus, and the head of Damascus is Rezin. Now within another 65 years, Ephraim will be shattered, so that it is no longer a people. And the head of Ephraim is Samaria, and the head of Samaria is the son of Remaliah. If you will not believe, you shall surely not last.
65 years from 745 BC takes us to 680 BC, the time of the Assyrian king Esarhaddon, who reigned from 681 BC to 669 BC. 2 Kings 18:10-11 tells us that now, within 24 years, in 721 BC, the kingdom of Israel fell to Shalmaneser and Sargon of Assyria, and many, but not all, were taken into captivity and replaced by peoples from other conquered nations, which was standard Assyrian policy.
At the end of 3 years, they captured it. In the 6th year of Hezekiah, which was the 9th year of Hoshea, king of Israel, Samaria was captured. Then the king of Assyria carried Israel away into exile to Assyria, and put them in Halah and on the Habor, the river of Gozan, and in the cities of the Medes.
However, it was after 65 years that Esarhaddon completed this work.
The king of Assyria brought men from Babylon, and from Cuthah, and from Ava, and from Hamath, and Sepharvaim, and settled them in the cities of Samaria, in place of the sons of Israel. So they possessed Samaria and lived in its cities.
These two stages also fulfilled Hosea's prophecy in Hosea 1, verse 2-8, where he used his children as symbols. Knowing that Ahaz was planning to turn to the Assyrians for help, rather than to God, in Isaiah 7, verse 10 and 11, the Lord offered to give Ahaz any sign he wanted to confirm this word.
Then the Lord spoke again to Ahaz, saying, Ask a sign for yourself from the Lord your God. Make it deep as shale or high as heaven.
But in Isaiah 7:12, evil King Ahaz refused, as his heart was set on an alliance with the Assyrians.
But Ahaz said, I will not ask, nor will I test the Lord.
So instead, in Isaiah 7:13 and 14, God gave the house of David, but not Ahaz, the sign of Immanuel. Hear now, O house of David, the Lord himself will give you a sign. And this word you is in the plural. It's giving the whole house of David a sign. Behold, the virgin, that is the virgin, that's the virgin of Genesis 3:15, the virgin shall conceive and bear a son, and shall call his name Immanuel. This was a promise that the house of David could not be deposed or destroyed or lose its identity until the birth of this virgin-born son, who is God with us. He is the guarantee that the house of David could not be destroyed. Then in Isaiah 7:15 and 16, Isaiah used his own son to give a sign to Ahaz that within a short time his two enemies would be dead.
He will eat curds and honey at the time he knows enough to refuse evil and choose good. For before the boy will know enough to refuse evil and choose good, the land whose two kings you dread will be forsaken.
This was fulfilled in 744 to 743 BC, when Assyria attacked Israel and conquered large portions of it, deporting a lot of the population to Assyria. However, since Ahaz had chosen to trust in Assyria rather than in God, he had opened the door for Judah, as well as Israel, to come under increasing Assyrian domination and oppression, as we read in Isaiah 7:17.
The Lord will bring on you, on your people, and on your father's house, such days as has never come since the day that Ephraim separated from Judah, the king of Assyria.
This is described further in Isaiah 7 18 to 25, through to Isaiah 8, 1 to 10. This came to pass. From this time, the dark shadow of Assyria would increasingly cover the Holy Land, leading to Israel's destruction in 721 BC, as well as Judah's devastation shortly afterwards. If not for divine intervention, Judah also would have fallen at that time. We've seen that Assyrian influence had been growing in the northern kingdom of Israel and throughout the region, which Pekah, king of Israel, and Rezin, king of Syria, were resisting. When King Ahaz of Judah refused to join them, they attacked Judah, and Ahaz then submitted himself to Tiglath-Pilesar, king of Assyria, asking him to come down and save him. Soon after, Tiglath-Pilesar invaded Syria and Israel, taking the son of Israel's territory. At this point, Hoshea rose up and killed Pekah, no doubt to save Israel from destruction, for Pekah had been the enemy of Assyria. This was in the 20th year of Jotham, during the co-regency of Ahaz and Jotham. 2 Kings 15, 29 and 30 tells us, in the days of Pekah, king of Israel, Tiglath-Pilesar, king of Assyria, came and took Ijon, Abel-Beth-Maachah, Janoah, Kadesh, Hatzor, Gilead, and Galilee, all the land of Naphtali, and he carried them captive to Assyria. Then Hoshea the son of Elah led a conspiracy against Pekah the son of Remaliah, and struck and killed him. So he reigned in his place in the 20th year of Jotham the son of Uzziah. There was a sense in which Hoshea held the reins of the government from this time. However, it's evident that he was not officially enthroned as king of Israel until the 12th year of Ahaz's sole reign in Judah, which was not for another 15 years. We read in 2 Kings 17:1, in the 12th year of Ahaz, king of Judah, Hoshea, the son of Elah, became king of Israel in Samaria, and he reigned 9 years. It's important to remember here that 2 Kings counts the years of Ahaz's sole reign. 2 Kings 16:1 and 2 tells us, in the 17th year of Pekah, the son of Remaliah, Ahaz, the son of Jotham, king of Judah, began to reign. Ahaz was 20 years old when he became king, and he reigned 16 years in Jerusalem. The reason for this suspension of the monarchy is clearly the impending threat of the Assyrians, who were well known for their cruelty, especially towards opposing kings, and who now occupied the lands around Israel on 3 sides. Hoshea was no doubt submissive to the Assyrians and did not want to take any action that might provoke a negative reaction from Assyria. He would have waited for Assyrian approval. Instead, it seems that the Assyrians put Hoshea under one of their vassals who had already submitted to them and whom they could trust, namely Ahaz, king of Judah, who was also given the title King of Israel, as we see in 2 Chronicles 28:19.
For the Lord humbled Judah because of Ahaz, king of Israel, for he had brought about a lack of restraint in Judah, and was very unfaithful to the Lord.
It's also interesting to see that 2 Chronicles 28, 26 and 27 specifically mentions that on his death they buried him in the city in Jerusalem, but they did not bring him into the tombs of the kings of Israel.
Now the rest of his acts and all his ways, from first to last, behold, they are written in the book of the kings of Judah and Israel. So Ahaz slept with his fathers, and they buried him in the city in Jerusalem, for they did not bring him into the tombs of the kings of Israel. And Hezekiah his son reigned in his place.
In other words, the possibility of burying him amongst the kings of Israel existed by this stage. The fact that Ahaz had the heart and evil religious inclination of the kings of Israel would have helped to make him acceptable to them. We read this sorry tale in 2 Chronicles 28, 2-4. He continued the worship of the high places, of the golden calf, of Baal, and of Molech. He even sacrificed his own children to Molech. Thus Ahaz had the title of King of Israel, while Hoshea was the on-site overseer for these 15 years, until, in Ahaz's 12th year, Assyria permitted his enthronement as king. There is an inscription of Tiglath-Pilesar in which he claims, Pekah, their king, they had overthrown, and I placed Hoshea over them. This confirms the biblical account. Tiglath-Pilesar died in 727 BC, and 2 Kings 18:1 tells us that this was the 3rd year of Hoshea's reign, which was also when Hezekiah came to the throne of Judah. 2 Kings 17:3 tells us that Shalmaneser, the new king of Assyria, quickly asserted his authority by coming against Hoshea, who duly became his vassal and paid tribute. However, soon after, Hoshea stopped paying the annual tribute to Assyria, and instead secretly communicated with So, king of Egypt. As a result, Shalmaneser imprisoned him, invaded the land, and besieged the capital, Samaria. We read about this in 2 Kings 17:4-5.
But the king of Assyria found conspiracy in Hoshea, who had sent messengers to So, king of Egypt, and had offered no tribute to the king of Assyria, as he had done year by year. So the king of Assyria shut him up and bound him in prison. Then the king of Assyria invaded the whole land and went up to Samaria and besieged it 3 years.
2 Kings 18:9 tells us that this was in Hoshea's 7th year and Hezekiah's 4th year.
Now in the 4th year of King Hezekiah, which was the 7th year of Hoshea, son of Elah, king of Israel, Shalmaneser, king of Assyria, came up against Samaria and besieged it.
2 Kings 17:5 and 2 Kings 18:10 tell us that the siege lasted 3 years, by inclusive reckoning, that is, including the first and last years. So, 2 Kings 18:10 and 11 tell us that in the 9th year of Hoshea, king of the northern kingdom of Israel, and the 6th year of Hezekiah, king of the southern kingdom of Judah, Israel's capital city, Samaria, fell, and Israel went into captivity.
At the end of 3 years they captured it. In the 6th year of Hezekiah, which was the 9th year of Hoshea, king of Israel, Samaria was captured. Then the king of Assyria carried away Israel into exile to Assyria, and put them in Halah, and on the Habor, the river of Gozan, and in the city of the Medes.
In the Bible it says Shalmaneser besieged Samaria, but in the Assyrian records, the next king, Sargon, claimed to have captured Samaria early in his reign. Both are correct. As we shall see, according to the biblical chronology, Shalmaneser started the siege in 723 BC, and Samaria fell in 721 BC. But Shalmaneser died in 722 BC, midway through the siege, so it was indeed his successor Sargon who finished it, and moreover, he was probably Shalmaneser's general or Tartan from the start of the siege. Thus, the king of Assyria, referred to in 2 Kings 18:11 that we just read, was Sargon. This was the end of the northern kingdom of Israel. Hoshea was the last of her kings. The reason for her fall was her persistent idolatry, rebellion, and unfaithfulness to God. 2 Kings 17, 7-23 sums this up for us. For so it was that the children of Israel had sinned against the Lord their God, who had brought them up out of the land of Egypt, from under the hand of Pharaoh king of Egypt, and they had feared other gods, and had walked in the statutes of the nations whom the Lord had cast out from before the children of Israel, and of the kings of Israel which they had made. Also the children of Israel secretly did against the Lord their God things that were not right. And they built for themselves high places in all their cities, from watchtower to fortified city. They set up for themselves sacred pillars and wooden images on every high hill and under every green tree. There they burned incense on all the high places, like the nations whom the Lord had carried away before them, and they did wicked things to provoke the Lord to anger, for they served idols, of which the Lord had said to them, "You shall not do this thing." And they rejected his statutes, and his covenant that he had made with their fathers, and his testimonies which he had testified against them. They followed idols, became idolaters, and went after the nations who were all around them, concerning whom the Lord had charged them that they should not do like them. So they left all the commandments of the Lord their God, made for themselves a moulded image and 2 calves, made a wooden image, and worshipped all the host of heaven, and served Baal. And they caused their sons and daughters to pass through the fire, practiced witchcraft and soothsaying, and sold themselves to do evil in the sight of the Lord, to provoke him to anger. Therefore the Lord was very angry with Israel, and removed them from his sight. There was none left, but the tribe of Judah alone. Unlike Judah, who had a mixture of good and bad kings, all of Israel's kings were bad, walking in the sins of her first king Jeroboam, who instituted a false system of worship. But it was only a matter of time before Judah's sins would bring down a catastrophic judgment on her kingdom also. Hello, I'm Derek Walker. I'm the pastor of the Oxford Bible Church. Today I want to introduce you to what I believe is a very special book called The Keys of Time, a revelation of Bible chronology. This book will give you a thorough grounding in the exciting subject of Bible chronology, revealing the keys by which you can unlock the treasure chest of God's Word concerning its revelation of time. And so we start, you see, by looking at the major keys that will unlock this treasure chest, like the fact that all time is based on the creation week, and one day with the Lord is as 1,000 years, and we look into the Jubilee and how that also unlocks how God measures time. And we look at the principle of unreckoned time. And as we see the whole revelation of God in history and time fit together perfectly, we will get out of this, we'll get a revelation of the glory of God as the sovereign Lord of time, the God who is working out his purposes of grace in his perfect time, according to his redemption timetable. So through this book, God will impart to you a rich understanding of the times, giving you a fresh revelation of the special time in which we're now living near the end of the age. And it will prepare you for the momentous events that are just ahead, because we are living in the last days, and we need to understand the times that we're living in, and we need to understand God's revelation of time in the Bible. And having discovered the keys and God's framework of time, we then go through each period of history, starting from Adam to Abraham, and then from Abraham to the Exodus, and then from the Exodus to the dedication of Solomon's temple, and then the period of time leading up to the decree to restore Jerusalem by Artaxerxes, and then finally Daniel's 70 weeks that take us to the coming of the Messiah himself and his death and resurrection. We look and we show how all the pieces fit together perfectly into God's framework of time. And by the end of the book, you will know how to get the date of every event, every major event in the Bible, and how all these events fit together. And so this will enrich your understanding of the whole Bible and how it all fits together perfectly. And there are DVDs that go with this book that will enhance your study of it.